I took a solo job, deep in the woods. Something was leaving me messages. By silent screams. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Leo, and for the last 8 years, I've made a living by getting lost. I'm a seasonal wilderness technician, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the guy they hire to do the jobs no one else wants, in the places no one else goes. I've cataloged rare mosses in rain-soaked Pacific Northwest valleys and GPS-tagged wolf dens in the high Rockies. I thrive on the solitude. The deeper in I go, the clearer my head gets. The silence of the wild isn't empty. It's a language, and I'd spent years becoming fluent. This contract was supposed to be the best one yet. 6 weeks, completely solo, in the sprawling backcountry of the Kaniksu National Forest. The job was simple, almost meditative. Locate and decommission a dozen old, unmapped shelters scattered through the most rugged part of the preserve. These were relics from a bygone era, trapping lean-tos and hunting shacks from the 40s and 50s, now just rotting skeletons of wood slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The Forest Service wanted them gone, erased from the landscape to encourage the area to return to its purely wild state. It was my job to help it along. I'd be a ghost, tidying up the messes of other ghosts. The first 2 weeks were exactly the paradise I'd hoped for. I set up a base camp by a clear glacial creek and worked my way out in expanding circles. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. My only companions were the whiskey jacks that stole crackers from my camp table and the distant bugle of an elk at dusk. I felt a profound sense of peace. I was 1,000 miles from the nearest traffic jam, the nearest argument, the nearest anything. The days fell into a rhythm. I'd wake before dawn, heat coffee over my Whisperlight stove, and study my topographical maps. I'd hike for hours, navigating by compass and landmarks, feeling the satisfying burn in my legs as I pushed through dense undergrowth. Finding a shelter felt like discovering a lost ruin. They were always half-collapsed, surrendering to gravity and the relentless pressure of the seasons. My work was methodical. Pry apart the rotting timbers, scatter the remains, and rake the ground until the forest floor looked like it had never been disturbed. It was honest, physical work. I was a groundskeeper for the wild. It was on day 16, at the site of the 5th shelter, that the rhythm broke. This one was deep in a thicket of old-growth cedar, a place the sun struggled to touch even at midday. It was a simple 3-sided lean-to, its roof long since collapsed into a green carpet of moss. As I started pulling away the decaying logs, my glove caught on something hard and sharp. I cleared away the debris and found it. Propped against the back wall, almost hidden in the gloom, was an object. It was an effigy, about 2 feet tall, and it was made entirely of animal bones. They were old bones, bleached white and scoured clean by insects and time. Ribs were woven together with what looked like dried sinew to form a hollow, cage-like torso. A deer's jawbone served as a grotesque head, the teeth grinning in a silent rictus. The whole thing was impaled on a sharpened stake of pine, driven deep into the earth. It was jarring, but not yet terrifying. My first thought was that it was some kind of bizarre backcountry art project, or maybe a strange offering left by a hunter years ago. It was meticulously crafted, the bones laced together with a surgeon's precision. There was a weird, unsettling balance to it. I snapped a picture with my phone, more out of curiosity than anything else. Then I respectfully moved it aside, finished, dismantling the shelter, and tried not to think about it. 5 days later, I was 7 miles northeast at the site of the 6th shelter. This one was on a high, wind-blasted ridge, a tiny A-frame that had been mostly crushed by a fallen ponderosa. As I sawed through the deadfall, my eyes were drawn to a spot just inside the tree line. There was another one. It was nearly identical to the first. Woven ribs, a jawbone head, all impaled on a stake. My stomach tightened. The first one had been a strange anomaly. The second was a pattern. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on the dry pine needles. This was no coincidence. The distance between the 2 shelters was immense, the terrain a brutal mix of steep inclines and choked ravines. To place these objects here was a deliberate act. It required immense effort and an intimate knowledge of this unmapped wilderness. Pulled out my map and a grease pencil. I marked the location of the first shelter and then the second. I drew a line between them. It was almost perfectly straight. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind crept down my spine. That line cut across the land with a blatant disregard for topography. It ignored the trails I had to follow, the river I had to ford, the ridges I had to climb. Someone had walked that impossible line. From that day on, the forest changed. The comforting solitude began to feel like a heavy, watching presence. The silence was no longer a language I was fluent in. It felt like a held breath. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded intentional. I started stopping abruptly on the trail, straining my ears, expecting to hear the echo of a footstep that wasn't my own. There was never anything, just the wind and the creak of the trees. The emptiness itself began to feel menacing. The seventh shelter was at the bottom of a damp, fern-choked canyon, and there, waiting for me, was the third effigy. It was staked, right in the middle of the collapsed structure. I stood there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I got out my map again. The third point lined up perfectly with the first two. Now, it wasn't just a line, it was a vector. It was pointing somewhere, and it was intersecting directly with the locations I had been assigned to work. This wasn't about the shelters. This was about me. I called my supervisor, Dave, that night, on the satellite phone. The connection was terrible, his voice a crackling ghost in the receiver. "Dave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm finding some really strange stuff out here. Ritualistic-looking things, bone sculptures." "Trail junk, Leo," he crackled back. "You wouldn't believe the crap people leave in the woods. I once found a whole porcelain toilet up near Priest Lake. Just focus on the work. You're making good time." "No, Dave, this is different. It's systematic. They're on a straight line, and it crosses right over my work sites. It feels like—" I struggled for the right word. "Like a warning." There was a burst of static. "A warning? From who? Sasquatch?" He laughed, a thin, tinny sound. "Look, if you see anyone, just remind them they're on federal land and to pack. Out their trash. Get some sleep, Leo. You're just getting spooked by the quiet." But it wasn't the quiet that was spooking me. It was the violation of it. The effigies started to get more recent. At the 8th shelter, I found one made with the bones of a fox. They weren't bleached white, they were still greasy, with scraps of dried cartilage clinging to them. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The smell of decay hung faintly in the air. This wasn't an artifact from the past. This was happening now. The feeling of being watched intensified into a suffocating certainty. I'd be eating my dehydrated dinner by the fire, and I'd get the distinct primal sensation of eyes on my back. I'd spin around, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive dark, but there was only ever the impenetrable wall of the forest. The light would catch on a pair of watching eyes, and my heart would leap into my throat, but it would just be a deer or a curious raccoon, quickly turning and melting back into the night. The animals were acting strange, too. The birds seemed to fall silent whenever I approached a new work site. The chattering squirrels would vanish. It was as if I was walking with a predator, a silent companion whose presence terrified everything but me. Then came the 9th discovery. This one wasn't at a shelter. I found it halfway up a scree slope, a place I had to cross to get to my next location. It was another effigy, but this one made me physically sick. Woven into the cage of bleached ribs was a single, muddy, worn-out child's sneaker. A little blue trainer with a Velcro strap. It was modern. It had no reason to be here, miles from the nearest road, in a part of the forest that would be impossible for a child to reach. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. Had someone gone missing out here? Was this a memorial? Or was it something far, far worse? That night, I barely slept. I sat by the dying embers of my fire, my camp axe in my lap, jumping at every hoot of an owl, every skittering mouse in the undergrowth. I felt trapped. My job was to stay here for 3 more weeks, but the wilderness had become a cage. I thought about packing up and hiking out, breaking my contract. But then what? What would I tell Dave? That I got scared of some backcountry art projects. He'd think I'd lost my mind. I'd be a laughingstock. The 10th effigy broke me. I was hiking along a narrow game trail, my mind a fog of anxiety. I snagged my pack on a low-hanging branch and a small bright orange zip tie, one of the custom ones I used for gear management, fell off and landed in the dirt. I was too tired and on edge to bother picking it up. It was just a tiny piece of plastic. Insignificant. The next day, I found the 10th shelter, and there, not 50 yards from my new campsite, staked into the ground with a terrifying sense of ownership, was the effigy. It was freshly made. The bones were from a snowshoe hare, so recent they still had flecks of fur on them, and woven tightly into the center, cinched around a vertebra, was my bright orange zip tie. My blood went cold. It wasn't just a pattern anymore. It wasn't just a line on a map. They weren't just in the forest with me. They were behind me. They had watched me drop that zip tie. They had waited for me to leave, then walked over, picked it up, and used it to build their next silent, screaming message. I am being followed. I am being observed. My own discarded trash, my own careless footprint on this wilderness was being used as a mark against me. This wasn't a warning. It was a claim. They were showing me that this place, this silent, ancient forest, was theirs. The shelters I was dismantling weren't just abandoned buildings to them. They were part of the landscape. And my work, my methodical erasure of human presence, was an act of aggression. I wasn't tidying up. I was trespassing. I was violating a territory I couldn't see, governed by rules I couldn't comprehend. I scrambled back to my tent, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I threw my gear into my pack with shaking hands. Food, water, stove, none of it mattered. I just had to get out. I looked at the map one last time. There were 2 shelters left, the 11th and then the 12th, which was the final point on my contract. According to the line I had drawn, the line of these bone sentinels, the 11th shelter should be just a few miles from here. And the 12th shelter, the last one on my list, lay precisely where the line seemed to end. Deep in a part of the forest, the map marked only with tightly packed contour lines and the words, impassable terrain. My mind was a war zone. One part of me screamed to run, to just hike east until I hit a logging road to abandon everything and never look back. But another, more stubborn part, the part that had kept me coming back to the wilderness for 8 years, rebelled. I couldn't let this thing chase me out. What was it? Was it a person? A hermit driven mad by solitude? Some fringe group living off the grid? The possibilities terrified me more than any ghost story ever could. An unknown human is the most unpredictable animal in the forest. I made a decision. It felt both brave and profoundly stupid. I had to see. I had to know. I left my main pack and most of my gear at the camp, taking only a small day pack with water, a headlamp, and the GPS unit. And my camp axe. I clutched it. In my hand, the worn hickory handle feeling both solid and completely inadequate. I followed the line. It was harder than ever now. The forest grew denser, the ground a tangled mess of fallen trees and thorny bushes. Whoever or whatever was making this trail was not bound by human limitations. They moved through the wilderness, like water, finding the path of least resistance in a way I couldn't. It felt like I was being led. After an hour, I found the 11th effigy. It was different. It wasn't staked in the ground. It was hanging. It was suspended from the branch of a massive, gnarled pine, swinging gently in the breeze. And it wasn't made of animal bones. It was a crude approximation of a human figure, woven from branches and packed with moss. And it was wearing my hat. The beat-up, sweat-stained baseball cap that had blown off my head in a gust of wind 3 days ago. It hung there. A grotesque scarecrow of myself, turning slowly in the dappled sunlight. This was the final warning. Turn back. I stood there for a long time, my knuckles white on the handle of the axe. Every instinct I had, every primal alarm bell in my brain was shrieking at me to flee. But I couldn't. The trespasser had marked me, and now I had to see his face. I pushed on, heading for the final point on the map. The terrain became brutal. I was climbing now, hand over hand up steep, moss-slick rock faces. The air grew thin and cold. Finally, I pulled myself over a ledge and found it. It wasn't a shelter. Not a man-made one, anyway. It was a shallow cave, a dark slash in the face of the cliffside. The entrance was flanked by 2 enormous, complex effigies, monstrous things made from the entire skeletons of deer, twisted and woven into horrifying sentinels. The stench of rot and wet earth rolled out of the darkness. This was the end of the line, the heart of the territory. My contract was to decommission a shelter. Was this it? A place that had been here since before the trappers, before the loggers, before anyone? My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. I took a deep breath, thumbed it on, and pointed the beam into the cave. The light cut through the darkness, and I saw him. He was sitting against the back wall, maybe 20 feet in. He was old, emaciated, with a long matted tangle of gray hair and beard. His skin was the color of dirty parchment, stretched tight over his bones. He was dressed in a patchwork of rotting canvas and animal hides. He didn't flinch at the light. He just stared back at me, his eyes dark, sunken pits in his skull. They were calm. There was no madness in them, just a profound, ancient weariness. The cave was his home. The walls were covered in charcoal drawings, animals, trees, and dozens of stick figures that looked eerily like the bone effigies. In the center of the floor was a small, neat fire pit, long cold, and all around him, placed with incredible care, were objects. Not junk, not trash. They were artifacts. A rusted logging saw, a cracked leather boot, a tin cup, a child's doll, its porcelain face shattered, and a small, bright orange zip tie. He hadn't been following me to threaten me. He was a collector, a curator, the forest's memory keeper. The shelters I was destroying, the things people left behind, the tiny traces of our passage, he was gathering them. He was preserving them. The effigies weren't warnings. They were markers. They were monuments. They were his way of mapping a world that was being erased piece by piece. My work was an assault on his history, on his entire reality. He slowly, deliberately, raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the axe I was holding. His meaning was perfectly clear. Will you destroy this place too? I looked at the axe, this tool of my trade, designed to dismantle and erase. I looked at this man, this ghost of the wilderness who had been silently watching me, trying to communicate with me in the only language he had left. He wasn't a monster. He was a part of this place. The real trespasser, the one with no understanding of the language of the forest, was me. I lowered the axe. My mission, my contract, my job, they all felt like a violation. Slowly, I unclipped the GPS unit from my belt. I switched it on, marked the location of the cave, and labeled it Site 12, decommissioned. Then I turned it off. I took the axe and I laid it on the ground just outside the cave entrance. An offering, an apology. The old man watched me, his expression unchanging. I gave him a small, respectful nod, and I backed away. I walked all afternoon and into the night, not stopping to make camp. I hiked out the next day and told Dave I had finished the contract early. I never told him what I found. There are no words to describe it, not in any report. I haven't taken another wilderness contract since. The silence I once craved now feels different. It's not empty anymore. I know that it's full of memory, full of history that we walk through without seeing. I used to think I was fluent in that language, but I learned that I was just a tourist, loudly mispronouncing the words. There are deeper, older dialects, and there are people out there, in the quiet, wild places, who still speak them, and they are watching us, always watching.